r/AskReddit. Teachers of Reddit, what's your holy crap? This student is completely different from what I thought story. I teach Gen Ed English composition at a university. I had a student once who I assumed was coming to class hungover. He'd sit near the back and about halfway pay attention. He'd zone out during class activities and he barely turned in anything. I honestly didn't think a whole lot about it, since there are usually a few in each class who just won't get it together and do the work. One day he shows up in my office hours and he's looking rough as hell. He tells me that he is addicted to heroin and wants to get clean, but his dad has told him he either has to enroll in college or get a job if he wants to live at home. I suggest that maybe a rehab program would be a better deal, but apparently that wouldn't be covered by the crap insurance this family has access to. This is the us, several years ago. Student us failing all his classes and has a come apart in my office because he's scared to death his dad will kick him out and he'll go back to couch surfing at his junkie friends' houses. So it becomes my mission to get this kid through English camp. When he's too sick to come to class, I make sure he has access to notes and lecture materials. He hangs out in my office when he's feeling too rough for class, and sometimes he just gets up and leaves class. But he's writing his papers and he's learning stuff. And damn if he didn't scrape out a B. I've never seen a student work that hard against that huge of an obstacle before or since. This kid who in week 3 I had pegged as a lazy party person turned out to be a legitimate superhero doing something harder than anything I'd ever done. He's still one of my heroes, and also for the record he's still hammering away at a college degree, and after a few lapses here and there is over a year sober. We low-key keep in touch on Facebook. Not when I was a teacher, but in 2nd grade our desks were arranged into clumps of 4. On the first day of school I found out that one of the students at my clump was actually named Lawrence Lightning. But he didn't show up the entire day, or the next day, or the day after that. Where was he? What was delaying him? Was he scaling Mount Everest? Was he assassinating a dictator in South America? Was he presenting his discovery of the cure for cancer to the president? Was he liberating an enslaved alien race in an alternate dimension? My anticipation to find out kept growing. He finally came to school at the start of week 2. He was just a generic looking fat kid. He had missed the first few days of school because he was visiting family in Oklahoma. I was very disappointed. I work at a school where there is definitely a group of redneck kids who all drive big loud trucks, wear giant belt buckles, and who miss school for hunting and fishing. It's not too surprising to me when some of these kids don't really have interest in reading novels and writing poetry and essays, so I at least always try to steer these kids towards writing about and researching things they would be interested in, like how hunters positively influence conservation and the benefits of getting into the trades. Generally, their writing skills aren't great when they manage to turn papers in at all. Last year I had a kid we'll call Cody. Cody was one of these kids, and he made absolutely no bones about not liking English class and writing. He would even ask me straight out what he could get away with doing in his essays just to get a C. I expected horrible spelling and grammar, no research, bullshitted or flat out plagiarized papers from him, and I was entirely prepared to see him the next year after he flunked out of my class. I mean, the kid spent my class playing online games and reading the farm co-op flyers when I started getting his stories and essays, though, albeit very late. He wrote articulately and thoughtfully about his subjects, and he always got a much better grade than just a C. For example, he wrote a detailed and very original paper about the American dream and the characters in Of Mice and Men, but also how the book can inform modern society about how the dream has changed and how we can live our version of it. Even now when I see Cody, he always says hi to me and pokes fun at me because we both know that, even though he didn't like it, I can at least poke fun that he turned out to be good at English class. I still make sure to tell him that he shouldn't sell himself short or take the easy way just because it's easy. I make sure Cody knows that he has talent that others might not see because of the snap judgments like I had made. I had a bright, well-spoken young man in my classroom. Always had the correct answer when I called on him, and he volunteered frequently. Struggled a bit with getting homework in on time, but that's not unusual in middle school. This was 6th grade, so this child was 10 or so. from a different district and a black male. First test comes around, and he is really struggling. Now, I know this kid knows the information. He is always participating in class. Finally, he comes up to me and said, and I quote, "Mrs. I'm finding this test rather difficult to read." Fortunately, I had several students who were oral testing, and I let him go in the other room and have his test read to him. I recommended him for testing. He had been skating by 4 years and could not read on even a first grade level. Just smart and a very verbal learner. Severe dyslexia. Went through the program in record time, was reading almost at grade level by the end of the year. 5th child in his family, name was Quintus. 6th grade, and this had never been addressed in his previous classes. He wasn't reading at a first grade level. I think the fact that he was able to answer the questions, plus being a black male, caused people to overlook his problems for so many years. He graduated with honors, but I don't know what happened to him, though I often wonder. This is a bit more general than what you wanted, but it doesn't take long to get an idea of who seems bright and who doesn't. A few weeks at most. I have about 200 students in 8 different classes. At exam time, my guesses are usually about 90% correct. But every exam there are 2 kinds of surprise students. Those that are unexpectedly clever. These kids knew all the stuff anyway, but just didn't put up their hands or volunteer information. It could be a personality thing. Maybe they're not that social. Maybe they're shy. Maybe they feel like answering too much would look egotistical. Who knows? But they turn out to be just as smart, and sometimes smarter, than the ones who put their hands up all the time. B. Those who are unexpectedly stupid. These are kids who've maybe been taught by mummy and daddy to put their hands up, or did it because all the class was doing it, and they don't want to look stupid, or whatever, and they appeared to know the answers, but in fact, were just copying whatever the smartest child in their group whispered to them. I remember one boy who made me laugh a bit. Whenever a question was asked, he would sit bolt upright in his chair, tilt his head slightly to one side, put a frown of stern concentration on his face and shoot his hands straight up. But when asked, he never actually knew the answer. He just wanted to look like he did. This made me pretty curious, so I was interested in meeting his parents. I eventually did meet his mother, who was a teacher herself. Without realizing it, she had trained him to have the appearance of paying attention and knowing what was going on. But in fact he never did. I think he just wasn't up to her intellectual expectations, so he learned to fake it. She was convinced he was the smartest boy in the class when he was at the bottom, if not the very lowest. How do you tell someone what they've done? You've trained your son to give the impression of being smart without actually being so. You don't. I spoke to his teacher next year, and he had exactly the same impression. I had a student who was an issue from 6th grade on. Suspended constantly for fighting, made his 7th grade science teacher cry repeatedly, so on. His reputation preceded him when he entered my classroom, but he actually turned out to be incredibly bright, if not a little hyperactive. We worked with his hyperactivity. I learned not to admonish him for getting up to walk around the room out of turn. And he ended up not only being one of my best students, but tested into honors. It turned out he had a lot of home life issues and he mostly used his behavior as a shield, but he was bright in ways you don't usually see in 8th graders. He could easily connect texts to real world relevance, and was able to discuss current events at an almost adult level. I've had a couple of younger siblings who have been completely different from their older siblings. The most extreme was a boy named Joe. Joe had 3 older brothers who were always in trouble for something. I had 2 of the older brothers, and whenever their mum or dad would get called in, they would blame the school and insist that their boys could do no wrong. One of them destroyed the computer room because his girlfriend broke up with him. These kids were out of control. Anyway, I see Joe's last name and automatically knew that he was related to these boys. I thought I was going to be in for another long year, but as it turns out, Joe was well behaved. He rarely missed a homework assignment and often contributed to class discussion. I never had an issue with him. Instead of destroying the school, Joe participated in the school play. He wasn't an outstanding student, but he got good grades in my class. It's really interesting to see how siblings can be so different from each other. I have 2 sons, so I try not to judge a kid based on how their older sibling was, but it's hard not to sometimes. Had a kid transferred to us after an expulsion, autistic, had punched his previous teacher in the face. I had various meeting and training courses to prepare for this kid, learned calming techniques, anger management, physical restraint, etc etc. First day in, and I'm feeling nervous, but it quickly turned out he was the nicest kid you've ever met, bright as a button, helpful, funny, just a lovely kid to be around. It took a few weeks before he started talking about his previous school. Turns out the teacher was an abusive bitch, used to make fun of him because of his very mild autism, tried to trip him up in front of his peers. I would have punched her too. Had a super confident kid in my adult ESL class. He knew the answers and went out of his way to demonstrate his fine English skills. He really excelled, and he wanted everyone to know. He wasn't super arrogant, but he bordered on being annoying. So, he is going back home to Saudi Arabia, and I noticed that he had bought his father 2 $1,000 watches. I joked that one watch would probably be enough, and all his confidence melted away as he told me how his father ignored him. He said that his father didn't even say goodbye when he left for the US. In fact, he made jokes and called him a liar. He needed the watches to get his father's attention because his dad had married his 4th wife and was more interested in the new wife and kids. His dad had something like 20 kids. I thought he was going to cry. He said that he would never have more than 1 wife and his kids would know that they are loved. Poor kid. I had a kid 1 year who was on the average low side academically, got in a bit of trouble, but nothing awful, and could be a middling pain in the ass on a regular basis. The kind of kid that just doesn't shine in a school setting. Anyway, my class did this project, and we had a long, bored line of parents waiting for something. The parents were getting restless and frustrated, and I felt terrible that I hadn't set it up better. This kid, aged 8, just started working the line. Hey, Mr. So-and-so, you coaching baseball this year? How's your team doing? Mrs. Whoever, you're looking lovely tonight. Great to see you. He had the whole crowd in the palm of his hand. I was the kid's teacher pretty early in my career, but it absolutely taught me that school is just one aspect in students' lives, and if things aren't great for the kid in school, I should look to see if there's somewhere else he can shine. I had a student 1 year who was a very proud lesbian and was never afraid to share with the class how disgusting men were to her and how not attracted she was to men. One day, another teacher frantically ran into my room stammering, crying, and pale as a ghost. I was terrified because I thought one of her kids was hurt, someone died, something horrible happened. Well, something traumatic had indeed happened. She walked in on a lesbian student having sex in the art room with a young man. Needless to say, that was surprising to many of us, and not at all what we expected. Thanks for watching UpGoat Reddit. Try like and subscribe button if it still works.